Welcome everyone. This is Right in Brooklyn Talk with the great and talented Adam Mansbach. I'm Professor Theo Ganji. I'm the director of the MFA program in creative writing at St. Francis College. We are still the only low residency MFA program in New York City. We offer tracks in screenwriting, fiction writing, poetry. We have a lot of great writers and events like this year round at St. Francis College. So please, stop by, check us out, check out our YouTube channel, and like and subscribe and all the fun things. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Adam Mansbach. Adam, full disclosure, is an old friend of mine from my own MFA days at Columbia, where Adam and I actually didn't attend at the same time, but that's neither here nor there. I'm going to go ahead and read this this potentially long, I'll acknowledge, bio, and just to remind us sort of what's kind of been Adam's experience and how what maybe we can learn from his path. Adam Mansbach is a novelist, screenwriter, cultural critic, and humorist. He is the author of the number one New York Times bestseller, Go the F to Sleep, which has been translated into 40 languages, named Time Magazine's 2011 Thing of the Year, and sold over 3 million copies worldwide. The two sequels, You Have to Fucking Eat and Fuck Now There Are Two of You, are also New York Times bestsellers, and the audiobooks narrated by Samuel Jackson, Bryan Cranston, and Larry David are pretty fucking good as well. I kind of want to end it there. I don't know. I'm going to keep reading, but that's a great paragraph. Mansbach's novels include Rage is Back, The End of the Jews, winner of the California Book Award, Angry Black White Boy, which is taught at over 100 schools. It was adapted to a prize-winning stage play. Also, sorry, did I speak correctly?
No. I'm just complaining about the, go ahead. I'm gonna shut up. Sorry. I'm gonna mute myself.
Let me get through your accolades, sir. He's also the author of 2 supernatural thrillers, The Dead Run and The Devil's Bagman. That's a great title. And 2 middle grade series, Jake the Fake Keeps It Real, co-written with Craig Robinson. A Scholastic Book Club main selection that Mansbach is currently adapting for the Disney Channel, and for Benjamin Franklin is a huge pain in my ass, co-written with Alan Zwiebel, which is forthcoming as a podcast. With Dave Barry and Alan Zwiebel, Mansbach also wrote For This We Left Egypt, a finalist for the Thurber Award for American Humor and the best-selling A Field Guide to the Jewish People. Mansbach's debut screenplay for the 2016 Netflix original Barry was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award, NAACP Image Award. He recently adapted D.L. Hughley's book, How Not to Get Shot and Other Advice from White People. There's a 1-hour special on Comedy Central, and his forthcoming projects include a crime thriller, The Handler, produced by Thunder Road, and Super High, a comedy starring Adam Sandberg, Craig Robinson, and Common. All right, there's some more awards on here. I kind of feel like
enough is enough. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like that was enough. Sorry, awards. But yeah, I mean, obviously everything there is super impressive, but I think the most interesting thing that stands out for me is how you maintain sort of being in all these different sort of fields, while kind of the book industry in particular tends to want people to keep doing the same thing once someone has done something good.
Right.
So can you speak on it? What do you think? How do you think you managed to kind of maintain this kind of profile in all these different pots? And we didn't even mention your latest one, which we'll get to.
Yeah. I think you're right. There is certainly the risk of being pigeonholed into doing one thing. And I think a lot of times it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. People believe that they have to stick to one thing, so they do. I've always been something of, well, it's interesting because for a lot of years, I really just wrote novels. I just wrote literary novels and a little bit of journalism, the occasional book review or essay or op-ed. But really at any given time, my head was down and I was working on a novel for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever. And I like that, and I found it satisfying. But my background was a little more diverse than that. I grew up writing poetry probably more seriously than fiction until a certain point. I was probably more serious about writing rap lyrics than anything until I was 22, you know.
Mm.
Um, and I find a lot of enjoyment in learning different forms, figuring out the rules of a genre or an art form, and then figuring out how to move around within it, bend those rules. That keeps the learning curve high in a way that I've always found rewarding. I mean, particularly since my first love really is like writing bars, writing rap lyrics, which is an incredibly regimented form. You're dealing with meter, you're dealing with beats per minute, you're dealing with rhyme scheme. Um, I often feel that those kind of parameters lead to creativity and even innovation. So, you know, that's kind of in the background for me is those experiences. Um, at a certain point, a couple of things happened. One, on a very practical level, it became a lot harder to make a living writing literary fiction. Um, it's no coincidence that my career started to branch off in a lot of different directions after like 2008. I published The End of the Jews in 2008. Um, it was a big literary novel, big in the sense of like long, like not in the sense of like successful. But it took me like 4 or 5 years to do it. It was a book that I labored over intensely,
Yeah,
like tore apart and rebuilt.
I remember.
Um, you remember that? Yeah. And it was grueling, you know, and I was doing it with an editor named Chris Jackson, who was, you know, very sharp and relentless in really pushing me to make it as good as it could be. Um, and, you know, that book kind of like did many of the things that one could expect or hope for a literary novel to do. Like, you know, it got generally well reviewed. It won an award. I got a decent advance for it. Um, but that felt like the ceiling to me. And then the ceiling got dramatically lower because, you know, the economy crashed. And I was sort of like, okay, if that's the best I can do and hope for from this medium within reason, I better invent some new like streams of income, you know? And I happened to get a 1 year teaching appointment at that time. I went from California where I lived to I was living in Philly and teaching at Rutgers in Camden. So I sort of also got a taste of like a regular paycheck and a little bit of stability. And I also had a kid that year. So suddenly I have a kid to think about, I have a regular paycheck, and the world of literary fiction is showing signs that it's not gonna like sustain me or anybody else going forward. So I was like, what do I do here? My only talent essentially is still writing. So within that, how do I kind of diversify my portfolio a little bit? Um, so I started dipping my toes into the waters of screenwriting. I'd always been interested in screenwriting. I'd always been a movie buff. I'd always been, you know, dialogue had always come pretty easily to me. I felt like it was something that I could mess around with. Um, and also I happened to at that point have become pretty close friends with a director who had optioned one of my books previously. He had optioned Angry Black White Boy, was unable to get it made, but he and I sort of stayed in touch. And he was like, yo, write me something I can shoot cheaply. Like, write me a movie that I can put this actor in and shoot in 2 weeks for like, you know, under $200,000. And I was like, okay, parameters. Like, you know, this is a small enough box. Let me put my mind to it. So I started doing a little screenwriting and exploring that world. Um, and you know, I also around that time, as I said, had a kid. So I ended up writing Go the Fuck to Sleep the following year. In 2010, I wrote it. 2011, it was published. You know, and this was like an obscene fake children's book that was 400 words long. It was ridiculous to me that I was even able to find a publisher for it because my agent didn't even want to send it out. He was like, this is cute, it's funny, but there's no market for it. Nobody wants this. He had just been like unable to sell some like parody That's like, you know, like a Goodnight Moon parody that like a late night David Letterman writer had written. He was like, you know, I don't know what to do with this. If Akashic wants it, you should do it with them. I had also sent it to my friend Johnny Temple, who ran Akashic Books, who also was like, this is funny, but I don't think I'm going to publish it. And I was like, nah, I mean, you know, of course not. But, you know, I thought you'd enjoy it.
I was joking around anyway.
Yeah. But I mean, not, you know, not to walk through every step of my career, but when Go the Fuck to Sleep was published in 2011, it was very successful. And by that time, I'd been amassing all kinds of different work as a screenwriter, as a fiction writer, as a genre fiction writer, because I had decided, I had sort of stumbled into an opportunity, almost like a work for hire opportunity to write a supernatural thriller. So all that to say that by the time, basically in 2011, I had an opportunity, because of the success of Go the Fuck to Sleep, to get a lot of other things set up. Right. And I had a lot of other things to set up. So, you know, they say like, you know, opportunity calls, but opportunity knocks, but he never calls before he comes, you know? So if you're lucky, you're ready. And I happen to be ready in the sense of having a stack of work to like get off. So when Go the Fuck to Sleep was the #1 New York Times bestseller, and I was running around promoting it and all that stuff, I had a new novel to sell. I had a couple of screenplays under my belt. I had enough experience in the kind of TV and movie world to go and sell a sitcom and, you know, set up the supernatural thriller that had like, that's a whole long story that I won't even go into. I was supposed to write it. I was supposed to co-write a book with the director, Robert Rodriguez. I wrote some sample pages. We sent it out. He didn't like the offers we got because they weren't as high as the offers his boy Guillermo del Toro had gotten. So he dropped off the project. So I just had this thing sitting there and it was just in a drawer. And then it was like, hey, you know, anyway, so in rapid succession, I suddenly went from being just a novelist to being a best-selling writer of obscene fake children's literature, and also a guy who through that was able to set up, you know, a sitcom, a supernatural thriller, my next literary novel, some TV projects. And, you know, and from there, I just sort of like began to juggle. I began to sort of develop a different mind state about writing, less of a work on one thing to the exclusion of all else, and more of a like juggle various projects, figure out what needs my attention at a given moment, but like keep a lot of balls in the air. The sitcom, in fact, was called Balls in the Air. That was the name of the sitcom that I sold to CBS that never got made. And one thing I learned is that my training as a novelist was kind of like the way that runners like train high where there's no oxygen and then race low where there is oxygen and they're faster when they're low. Training as a novelist meant that I could, you know, that everything except a literary novel to me seemed relatively easy. There was more oxygen at those levels. So a screenplay seemed like something I could write very quickly. You know, I grew up writing rhymes, so anything that rhymed, I could do very quickly and do a pretty good job of. You know, like a literary, you know, all these forms in my mind compared to like the grind of a literary novel, I was like, yo, I can do these things. You know, and then the humor writing came in, the middle grade stuff came in. A lot of these things were things that like my management put in front of me as like, hey, do you think you want to do this? Do you think you could do this? And generally speaking, because they were interesting to me and because I was still in the mind state of like, yo, I'm hungry and I don't know how long any of this is gonna last. Yes, let me do it. You wanna write a middle grades series with Craig Robinson? Yes. Like, have you ever written a middle grades book? No. But I got an 11-year-old, like I can figure, you know, like I said yes to a lot of stuff and I figured a lot of stuff out on the fly. And I began to delve deeper into certain mediums that really interested me, like screenwriting. I had written humor before, but I'd never thought about writing actual humor books. Humor was always an important part of my work. But suddenly I met Alan Zweibel, who wrote for Saturday Night Live from 76 to 81. And, you know, is kind of a comedy legend. And Dave Barry, who is a comedy legend that I grew up reading. And suddenly I was writing comedy books with them. And like, Yeah, I just kind of like put myself in a bunch of positions, said yes to a bunch of shit, and was like, I'll figure it out as I go along.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. And I think one of the things that's really impressive to me and interesting is how all of your projects still really feel like a Mansbach project, like whatever. And it's a very tricky thing. I think, a lot of, we get that feedback, I think, from the industry sometimes, from agencies, from whatever, publishers, producers, that, what's your point of view? What's your you thing? And a lot of times we associate that to mean, oh, I write middle grade fantasy. I write this thing, and I keep and I repeat that thing in a similar way that when we're in workshop mode, MFA mode, sometimes we are so consumed with our one project that we want done that maybe we neglect to pay attention to one of the aspects of being a working writer, which is in some ways you never want to be that vulnerable, right? You never want your career to rest on calling one shot over the getting up to bat and saying I'm gonna hit a home run over left field, and then if that doesn't happen, then it's like, well,
Yeah.
there's another pitch coming, right? There's and so it's nice when things obviously fall in your lap. I'm curious more, I guess. I think it's more sort of relevant in sort of our process is like, how do you still come up with the one that you want to do, especially when things are in your lap and they are interesting and they are fun? Like, how do you kind of try to make space for that project? And is it a mentality like where I think a lot of us hear the go the fuck to sleep story and how you got that off, and think of all the kind of little ideas that we've kind of had that came and went that we never got a book out of, much less obviously, a runaway success out of it. But we never even got a pitch out of it. You know what I mean? Like that it's sort of just stopped with the idea and we never kind of make that next leap. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, no, I like the way you set that up. And I think you put your finger on it right at the beginning there, which is the idea that your voice should carry you through no matter what the project, no matter what the genre. The thing that stays consistent is not the medium, it's the sensibility, it's the voice, it's the concerns, the worldview, the politics even of who you are as a writer. And I have very consciously tried to stay true to those things, and never really do anything that would play me out of position or make me feel like I had compromised. So yeah, like one of the things about Go the Fuck to Sleep that was really rewarding for me was the fact that for folks who knew me, they were like, what's hilarious about this whole situation, this whole like your ass is on the Today Show situation, is like, this is the same type of shit you've been talking since I met you. You know what I mean? This was not you trying to calculate and hit the zeitgeist through some like, formulation. There was no strategy here. This was just you articulating something that's very true to you and in your voice, and applying it to a certain genre and a certain medium and trying to be funny with it. But it wasn't like out of character. And I've tried to do that no matter what it is I do. Like there's a large part of me that views almost every project as an opportunity to smuggle certain ideas into the mainstream or into whatever the context is. So like, before Go the Fuck to Sleep, what I was known for, if I was known for anything, was like writing about race and culture and class and identity in this country, and kind of like trying to tell uncomfortable truths and use humor and absurdity in some cases to force people to engage in a conversation that they might be otherwise reluctant to, right? I'm a hip hop kid. I grew up as, the only white kid at the hip hop party, which forced me to develop critical sensibilities about race, about whiteness, about white supremacy, about the silence around those conversations. I was angry about it. I was insistent on making people talk about these things, making people address these things. And that's what I did in novels like Angry Black White Boy, which is like my second novel, the first novel of mine anybody gave a fuck about. So like, you know, exploring paradox and really trying to like go in and do critical work and explode things and like make them palatable, but also like difficult. And, you know, Go the Fuck to Sleep is like very much in line with that. It articulated a frustration that was universal, but that nobody really spoke about, that there wasn't necessarily a language to address. So for me, it's like, it makes perfect sense in the arc of my career. You know, sometimes the forbidden truth is about like the insidious nature of whiteness. Sometimes the hidden truth is like the paradox of loving your kid, but also wanting to like throw your kid out a window. But it's all of a piece for me and the type of things that I feel are important to like shed light on. Or, you know, like I wrote this movie called Barry, which came out in 2016. It's about Barack Obama's first 3 months in New York City in 1981 when he transfers to Columbia. My friend Vikram Gandhi directed it. I wrote it. And, you know, again, like the mission with that movie was to use the kind of the sexiness of making a movie about the future president to smuggle a conversation about race and masculinity into movie theaters. Get a movie made that wouldn't have been made otherwise, but that we felt would be just as good a movie if this guy doesn't turn into the president. He just goes on to be, you know, a community organizer. The Jake the Fake books are about a kid who like fakes his way into a performing arts middle school and the kind of wacky, funny adventures he has. But peppered into that book, among all the jokes, are like, you know, things that are important for me to say and to try to get through about artistry, about being true to yourself, like whatever, you know, whatever it is. I'm always going to try to do that shit. So yeah, for me, it's about maintaining the integrity of your voice and what you care about, and figuring out ways to apply it to whatever the medium is, you know, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, that's really interesting. I love that idea of smuggling something.
Yeah.
You're even in the attempt is also providing your work with some layers and some depth, like just keeping that idea, you know, in your process.
Yeah.
And and I could see, you know, people really relate to it as it applies to voice. So I think there's this interesting balance as you're talking between, you know, when you're going from medium to medium, the message is almost like you almost want to capture that irrelevant to the medium, and then when it's in the application, then you sort of study the mediums and learn their rules and learn their chord progressions, or learn their whatever the, you know, whatever the, you know, because I very much agree with you as someone who loves, you know, genre writing and genre fiction, and that, you know, having certain rules, I think, empower the art more so than like, well, just play whatever, you know, the scales give you something to, you know,
Yeah.
comment on and work and learn. And
Yeah.
so I guess the my next question is, so like, what's the application like now? So okay, you have this idea, you know, you have, there's certain basics, and the way, that's the stuff that you pitch, right? That's the stuff that, you know, that whether it's an editor, an agent, a producer, whoever you're talking to, that you have that clarity in the pitch. And then there's some craft really to learning the medium. And you know, I thought it was interesting in your talk, Adam did a craft talk a couple of days ago. For those of you who weren't able to attend, we do have it recorded. It'll go up on YouTube. But Adam mentioned, you know, he had an exercise, and then he said, kind of as an aside, all right, now imagine how it'd be different if this was a comedy. And I was like, man, that's so good for you, even if you're writing a drama, right? Because you're really defining what you're doing and the decisions you're making. Instead of just sort of making them, you're saying like, well, for this to be funny, this situation would have to be XYZ. Now, for this to be dramatic, I'm doing it. So, and I think it empowers you as a writer to understand like what you're doing is really is deliberate, it's intentional, and you want to make the best choices you can. So like, how was that process like for you? When did comedy present itself? Because that's its own incredible kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, as I listen to you talk, and as is so often the case, I think when you and I talk, the metaphor for writing so easily becomes music,
Yeah.
right? Because that's another passion that we share. It's another way of understanding craft. And I think as somebody who another thing about writing in different genres, just like performing or listening or caring about music across genres, is that you begin to use one to understand the others. You know what I mean? So like, you know, I grew up, as I said, rhyming and making beats and like being a hip hop kid and DJing and writing graffiti and all of that, and taking that like very, very seriously as a culture, as an identity at a time when it was not very much in the mainstream and you had to seek it out and
Yeah.
really like do some work for it. But I also grew up around a lot of jazz musicians, and I was a roadie for a jazz drummer for 7 years. And also, this was a time when hip hop and jazz didn't always get along so well. Like, there were a lot of jazz musicians who challenged hip hop's right to exist. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to map one onto the other, how to make hip hop legible for jazz musicians, how hip hop was in turn transforming jazz through sampling practices, how the aesthetics were continuous even if the medium changed, like what the points of rupture and continuity looked like. Um, and I think that I bring that to different genres too, like the idea of understanding one through another.
Yeah.
And like, for example, when I taught in an MFA program, probably the most successful class I taught was a screenwriting class for fiction writers. And the reason I think, you're familiar with this as well. Like, and it was, I think, illuminating for a lot of those writers because, again, it gave them boundaries and parameters. And it was like, you know, all of the indulgences that you're allowed when you're writing a novel, which is great, right? I love that. I love the freedom that comes with writing a novel where like there are rules, but you can connive and break them. And if you can make it work, it works, right? Like, you know, Roberto Bolaño is one of my favorite writers. Following his blueprint will get you nowhere. You know what I mean? This dude is introducing new characters on page 896 of an 898 page novel, right? Like, don't try that at home. You know what I mean? But screenwriting, on the other hand, is extremely rigid and it's deeply structured. And every 5 or 10 years, a new book comes out that becomes like, you know, the Bible of screenwriting. Right now, it's like Save the Cat, you know? And these books are all like, before that, it was Sid Field's the Art of Screenwriting. And they're all the same. They're all like, here are the 17 things that need to be in your screenplay. On page 5, you must have your inciting incident. Act 1 starts 3 pages later. You know, you've got to, you know, like do these things and you will have a properly structured screenplay, right? Like, these are the chord changes. These are the progressions. These are like the hard and fast rules. So like, you know, even having those, I would make these fiction writers read that book and be like, read it, assimilate it, put it away, never think about it again. But also think about every movie you've ever seen and how it conforms to that structure, and think about writing in a way that conforms to that and forces you away from your impulses to indulge, your impulses to digress. You've got a form here that is relentlessly propulsive, where everything has to move the story forward and you have no wasted motion. And you've got a hard page limit and you've got hard act breaks, and you can fuck around if you want, but it's not going to be to your benefit.
Yeah.
So can you do that? Can you work within this medium? And the students, I think, found it extremely liberating, right? Like, you wouldn't expect that necessarily, but that kind of form, that kind of structure can actually free you up. There's parts of your brain that you don't have to use because those rules are set, and now you just got to work within them, you know?
Yeah, no, the stress of the, you know, in some ways we buy into the the legend around the author, right? The auteur author that invents every single thing that's in this their brilliance out of their brilliant brains and their brilliant teeth and fingertips, and and like when you approach your own work with that assumption about how these things are created, that's extraordinary amount of stress. That's a lot of pressure to think you have to invent the genre at the same time as you're trying to execute it, when it's it's there are these sort of pathways for you, and sometimes it's really like the best writing is happening. Like I always think about it. So to bring it back to the jazz thing and the music thing, is like the jazz musician's favorite place is in improvisation, right? They want to get to the improvisation thing, but what do they do before they get to improv, right? They play the melody,
Yeah.
like they go through the entire chord progression and they internalize it, and then they have enough sort of structure around them. They have a bass player, they have a piano, they have the drums, they have their harmonies to be able to, now I can just relax and make beautiful things, right?
Yeah.
And I think as fiction writers, we kind of have to get our table set in a similar way in order to be able to relax and create beautiful things, like where I can just fully concentrate on describing the way this little paper bag floats in the air on the street or something ridiculous, or the dove and how they dive on over the shoreline, and look how pretty it is.
And I think another aspect to that, and something I've come to really believe in and rely on as I go along, is the pre-writing that you do, the structuring of the novel that happens, or the screenplay that happens before you write the first word. I'm a big proponent these days of like writing a thorough treatment, writing a thorough outline. That is the equivalent of giving yourself the chord changes before you begin to improvise.
Yeah.
And I think that I run into people a lot, younger writers, students a lot, who are resistant to it. They think they're gonna box themselves in or rob themselves of those moments of creativity if they have an outline and they have a structure. And I'm like, no, like, trust me, like you can still improvise, you can still deviate from the plan. You just have a plan. I mean, for me, a lot of times a project, the way I approach a project is in response to the previous project, right? Like you want to, like I mentioned writing The End of the Jews before. I leaped into that book without any real structure, any real idea where I was going. I was very eager to get started. And that's why it took me like 5 years to figure it out. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm never doing that again. So after that, I've been meticulous in like giving myself the blueprint I need, whether it's something very plotty where the twists and turns and voices have to be very intricately mapped, or it's not always that. And I've never felt like that robbed me of my fun. It never prevented me from taking a solo.
Right.
It gave me a container, within which to do that work, to do that improvisation, to have that fun. So to me, that's also a big piece of it, is like being diligent enough. There are, more often than not, it takes me longer to write a treatment for a screenplay than to write the screenplay.
Yeah. That's the points you get stuck on. What do I want this to be? Those are the hard questions, right? Executing a scene, once you know what you want it to be, or at least to have something you're going for, is improv. Deciding what that scene should be, is more like what writing is for a songwriter, right? It's it's interesting because it's a hard lesson, I think, to learn until you've been burned by the hot water, yourself, and not to touch it. But I also think it's a practical lesson as far as the longevity of one's career, to not be solely defined by one project, to be able to conceptualize them, set it aside, conceptualize a new project. And I just wonder, how do you think we would have responded as MFA students to if one of our professors said, all right, write this as a treatment?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things I remember a lot of my cohort doing in the MFA program was like just writing to deadlines. Like
Yeah.
I remember a lot of folks who were like, "Oh, yo, I got it. You're like, you want to have another beer? No, I got to get home. I have a deadline to like, I'm up tomorrow, or like I got to distribute my story tomorrow for next week's workshop." And it was this like on the treadmill writing to meet the deadline thing, which not only left no room for like planning and structuring and the treatment, it just like I felt like even at the time I was like, that doesn't seem like the best use of your time in this program.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know,
It's an interesting thing. And I think about this a lot, like because we have this interesting structure with the low res, which is, these intensive periods where there's a lot of work being done, a lot of workshopping, and then a lot of craft talks and these kinds of conversation career talks that we try to incorporate into these workshops. Obviously we do a lot of that kind of traditional work of, how does this scene, here's 5,000 words. How's it read? Is it good?
yeah,
How do I make this scene work? And a lot of people are working on novels. So it's kind
yeah,
of like, well, I could get 5,000 words of a novel of mine line edited, and it wouldn't necessarily really help me write that novel, right?
yeah,
That conceptual process that we've been through, at this point, quite a few times in our, whatever, that is inherently separate from executing a scene and making it good.
yeah,
So it's sort of like finding the balance there is tough.
yeah. And I remember teaching a class on the novel, a workshop on the novel. It was like everybody's thesis project was a novel in the program I taught in. And I was like, listen, if at all possible, do not come in and workshop a partial draft. Like
Mm.
it's gonna, to me, there are a lot of risks inherent to workshopping work that has not been completed, not finished. Obviously, if it was finished, you wouldn't need to workshop it, but like that you've gotten to the end of,
Yeah.
because there's a big risk in having the first 3 chapters of your 25 chapter novel workshopped and like getting derailed because you're actually only on chapter 8, and rewriting and reconsidering and reconceptualizing. You can do that over and over. Like I know, it's like it's like continually tinkering with and workshopping the first little piece and never like getting to the end. Like I don't know. I feel like there are a lot of
Yeah.
can happen. Yeah, I feel like
Yeah,
that's
I think it's tricky. I think there are ways that you can kind of approach an incubating idea in a supportive way that, and that it sounds like that kind of project is closer to a thesis, and that, yeah, that's a good argument for, having a partial draft when you're going up for thesis and that kind of thing. Um, all right, I want to open it up to questions, everyone. Chat feels kind of quiet. What um, Let us know if you have any thoughts about the conversation and what you'd like to know from Adam.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. While that's happening, one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to circle back on a little bit is the idea of balancing projects. Another aspect of that for me that's really important is kind of like the one for me, one for them idea, being clear on, it's okay to kind of like have projects that are more personal, that are nearer and dearer to your heart, things that you're going to write regardless because you have to, and it's just what you need to do, versus projects that are intentionally and entirely commercial in nature, that you're going to get notes on, you're going to be beholden to the people giving you notes, you're going to have to like do what you're told. For me, you got to, particularly if you're doing stuff like TV and screenwriting, which are inherently collaborative, um, where giant sums of money are required to like make something. So there's a million cooks in the kitchen and a million people have to sign off. For me, the discipline in those fields is to understand that everything is on the chopping block. Nothing is precious. No matter how much I love something, it might not end up in there. You know, like I'm writing this studio comedy right now, and like there's hundreds of jokes that are just like scattered like ashes across the plains. And some of them I think are hilarious, but like they just didn't make it. They're not going to be in there, you know. And I can't be like, no, my precious babies, because I'm writing it by myself, but if I was in a writer's room, everybody would be shooting 10, 20, 30, 40 jokes, and like 6 of them would make the sketch or whatever, you know. And the people I'm working with are like alumni of like Saturday Night Live, so that's normal for them. They're like, why'd you put this joke back in that already got cut? Like, you know, what are you fucking doing? So like being not precious in that setting, but then balancing that occasionally with something that's like very personal and where you can really like do your thing. To me, that's an important way to like maintain some sanity. I see some questions here.
Yeah, we've got a couple popping up. Let's see. So Regina is asking, I'm curious about what Adam just said about workshopping a partial draft. Can he speak a little more to that, please?
Yeah, sure. You know, I'm certainly not trying to make any hard and fast rules about what works and what doesn't. What I've found in the past as a teacher, and also as a student watching this happen to other people, I feel like there's a risk in workshopping anything that you haven't gotten to the end. Partial draft that, like, you know, if you haven't written the whole thing, I think it's possible to just get derailed, to start taking the criticism and reworking the part that is written rather than getting to the end, seeing the thing as a whole, and then beginning to shape it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Regina?
Sorry, I had a problem unmuting there. Yes, that does make a lot of sense. Thank you so much. So one other question as it relates to that.
Sure.
Now, you spoke earlier about basically having a completed treatment. So in the draft, would it just be like completing the treatment or completing the outline fully and then building that through the workshop, as opposed to trying to complete, you know, majority of the actual novel or whatever piece it is you're working on?
That's a good point. I mean, I think you're definitely onto something there, in that I would certainly be more comfortable workshopping a partially written manuscript if there is a thorough, complete treatment behind it. If you're like, look, here's the game plan. I've got this A to Z outline. I've only written up to P, but I know what happens next and I know where I'm going, and we can talk about it. Yeah, I think that's a good way to mitigate. I mean, because, you know, life is life, circumstances are what they are. You're not always going to be in a position to bring in and be like, here's my finished draft. Let's look at the whole thing. But I think what I don't feel is usually as helpful as could be is when folks come in and they're like, here's 3 chapters of the novel. I sort of know where it's going, but let's talk about what I've written and kind of collectively figure out where this is headed, you know? I think it's too many variables. It's too hard. It's too ethereal to, like, you know, I don't know, to be helpful anyway. I don't feel like I can be most helpful in those circumstances anyway.
Well, it sort of turns the process into more of a writer's room, right? And
yeah.
Like, you know, it's more of a like, and I think it could be helpful to have just some practice co-writing with each other a little bit. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's, you know, it's great to be able to hear and incorporate ideas that are coming from your peers if you have relationships like that.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
yeah, something we've been get some questions on the chat too about it, just for everyone. It's something we are, you know, talking about making a more formal part of the program, at least of the thesis. I think, at least especially for fiction writers, it feels like a treatment should be a part of, you know, what you submit in order to graduate. I just think it's just preparing you for the world, for the agent search, as Alita here is asking about. But it's also, I think, one of the frustrating things, and Adam, you know, in this story, and I've been talking to Yadon, who we speak to next Saturday about this, is, you know, agents are a bit of a mixed bag, I think, and their role that they play, and that, you know, it's great when they're supportive, but they're ultimately not the decision makers. And they, in their world, they are, I guess, because they decide whether to rep you or not. But sometimes they are another sort of step. And you do need people like that, but there are ways that this can work, and there's ways you can represent yourself to best manage that. I think one thing is just trusting your agent to do all the synopsis work, do all the pitching, and to define your project. You run the risk of them not doing right by you. So the more you are involved in that, the better I think you can guide that experience.
Yeah.
I want to jump to Keyshawn's question here. Keyshawn says, I deeply resonated with your relationship with hip hop music and how it influences your writing, Adam. If you could, what would you say influenced you more, the storytelling style or the rhythmic style? It's a great question.
Good question. You know, one quick final thought on treatments that I want to throw out is, in some ways, folks should think of a treatment as a piece of writing in and of itself, not just as a bunch of notes jotted in your notebook, but like a lot of TV deals, for example. If you get a development deal, which is by far the most common type of deal that you'll get trying to sell a TV show, it's a 5-step deal. And step 1 is a treatment. Like, the first thing you will be handing in to the producers, to the studio, is a treatment. And only when that gets approved do you move to a draft, a revision, another revision, a polish. So yeah, a treatment is actually like a thing to invest in and take seriously, not just as a map, but as the key to even sort of being unleashed to write your draft, if that makes sense, in a professional setting, in the TV world. Yeah, on hip hop, you know, it's interesting. I mean, when I discovered hip hop in like 1986, it was unlike anything that I'd ever heard. The amount of information packed into a rap song was 4 or 5 times what you could find anywhere else. So it was the rhythm and the method of storytelling, the method of communication was radically exciting to me. Like, the idea of using language in this way and using rhyme and wordplay in this way was incredible to me. And the window that it offered into the lives of the people rapping, it seemed intensely personal, stylized, and, you know, fanciful and braggadocious and full of like lies sometimes, but still intensely personal in a way that a lot of other music didn't feel to me. You know, like there was a rawness to the energy. And, you know, I also happened to start listening to hip hop as it began sort of cresting into its period of peak overt socio-political commentary, right? So like, I was a white kid in the suburbs of Boston. You know, I was 12 in 1988, and I was filled with the feeling that I was surrounded by like hypocrisy and silence around the perniciousness of racism and white supremacy in the country, that like nobody was addressing it honestly and openly. And then, you know, Public Enemy came out, and the Jungle Brothers came out, and Stetsasonic and Boogie Down Productions and NWA came out, and they were exploding that paradigm and giving me the ammunition I needed to like fight my teachers. You know what I mean? So it was all of a piece. It was the storytelling, it was the politics, the agitprop, it was the wordplay that made it all exciting. It was the method, you know, even just I mean, it's funny because like we take all this for granted now. Hip hop has taken over the pop culture landscape. All other elements of like pop music at this point are derivative of hip hop. But back then, it's hard to even convey how radically different and oppositional and exciting and innovative it was to be like chopping up records and sampling them. The idea that like this music was like loops of old records was like, people were so offended by that. They were like confused by it. You know, like people wanted to shut hip hop down. People wanted to say it wasn't music. People were like, it was, you know, so I kind of entered it at that time when it was like, you had to pick a side. And also it wasn't on the radio, it wasn't on TV. You had to like search it out and find it. So it kind of like radicalized me as an artist and as a thinker, you know? I could clearly talk about this for ever.
I was just sort of throw that little oop and get out the way. I love that answer. I think I also I'm also very influenced by hip hop in my writing, but I do it in a more of a smuggling kind of way. And I could tell you, every successful project I've been involved in has essentially been based on a song lyric that spoke to me. And so there's everything Adam's saying, but I could tell you, like, even conceptual, there's something about the way that medium uses language to communicate and break through that is so evocative that I think those who are able to kind of understand that language have no choice but to bring it into their work, right? Because it's so inspiring. All right, let's see what else we got here. Keyshawn, do you have any follow-ups? Where you at?
I'm here. I'm just looking like a hot mess, so I'm gonna keep my camera.
No problem. It's good.
Adam, I thank you so much for that answer, because I definitely, like I said before, resonated with how you spoke about it before, and I can see your passion for it. Because I started writing just poetry and rhymes and raps because I just love the medium. I loved just the idea of just being so braggadocious so beautifully, and to translate that into writing, into a career, into something from that you love. Thank you. I can't say it enough, but thank you. And I get it.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, you know, there's nothing that excites me more than like crafting like a dope punchline, or like flipping a little bit of wordplay. Like, I still write rhymes, you know, and I still will put off a work day for the sake of crafting like 16 bars. I get more excited about that than about, like, you know, the movie I'm being paid to write, you know what I mean? Like,
Definitely.
it's funny. The movie I'm writing right now, the thing with Andy Samberg and Common and Craig Robinson, those three characters are a washed up rap group from the 90s. And I get to write a bunch of lyrics. Like, I'm writing bars for Common in the movie. I'm writing bars for Andy in the movie.
For Common, that's amazing.
Which is hilarious. Yeah. It's so much fun. And that hip hop mentality too, the sensibility of improv, you know, like, hip hop got me through my education, because the skill set that hip hop teaches you, the sort of notion of intellectual democracy through collage, of picking and choosing the hottest bits and parts of all thought and all artistry, and stitching them into a kind of collage, and being open to them all, and knowing you can find like a hot drum break on a whack song, and knowing that if you can improvise and freestyle, you can like work your way to an idea, or bullshit your way past not knowing what the fuck you're talking about. Like, all these things have been invaluable to me, you know?
Absolutely. And just sometimes just being in that space where you're just writing something that's just rhymes. It doesn't have to even make sense. It's just something that ignites the writing process for anything else. So I definitely get that on a deep level. But again, thank you.
Yeah.
So here we have in the chat two of the most Brooklyn questions for totally different reasons you're going to see. So one is, where are you on Biggie versus Pac? Right? Okay, so, you know, be warned, this is a Brooklyn-based program. And the other question is, have you ever gotten a song produced? So hey, come on over here.
All right. All right. I mean, this might be controversial, but like, I consider Tupac to be one of the most overrated artists ever. I think he's a compelling dude. He had a lot of passion. There was an integrity to him that is very compelling. But in terms of writing rhymes, that dude I'm also an East Coast diehard. You know what I mean? So like,
that's right. Just be honest about that where you were at geographically. This is before you went out west.
Yeah, I mean, I came out west and it just became more of like a New York dude. You know what I mean? Like Tupac was never on my top 10, 20, 50, or 100 list. I respect him, but I wasn't ever listening to him. I lived with a dude from LA in college. I listened to Mad Tupac. I was like, that's cool. Can we listen to Black Moon now? You know? So for me, it's Biggie by a mile. And actually, the Biggie documentary that dropped a few months ago, I think is very much worth checking out for folks who haven't, particularly his interactions with his neighbor, Donald Harrison, who's a jazz musician who mentored Biggie when he was a kid, is really interesting. And the comparison that Harrison makes between Biggie and the drummer Max Roach in terms of the kind of like staccato release of words, I thought was really well done. It's only about a minute in the documentary, but it's constructed in a way that I thought made clear a point that I've been like trying to make for years, like trying to figure out how to articulate in this process of like sort of translating between hip hop and jazz, which I've spent a lot of time toggling between.
Yeah, that's activating my lizard brain here with the.
Have I gotten the song produced? Yeah,
I had to have to answer that, by the way.
I had a group in 1996, 97, 98 called Alley Cat Productions. We're up in Harlem. Yeah, we put out like a single. And more recently, my daughter, who's 13 now, she sings and she rhymes, and she made it onto vinyl before I did. She has a 45 that she did with my friend and yours, Frayne, that she has a little 8-bar verse on. It's like a funk Christmas song called Christmas at the Iceberg. And Frayne was like, yo, can Viv rap on this? And I was like, yeah. So she and I wrote a verse together and like pressed it up on a 45. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, damn, like the lifelong dream of having something on an actual record. My daughter made it before me and doesn't care, like doesn't give a shit. It's completely normal. It's like whatever for her. And I'm like, yo. Yeah. It's funny. Viv and I did a little segment on This American Life a couple of years ago about our relationship and rapping, and me kind of pushing her to rap and her resisting and me backing up and us having this whole thing. And they're rebroadcasting it today. So people keep texting me, "No, I heard you on the radio." And I'm like, oh shit. It's funny. So yeah, a few projects that have been out there on the rap.
That's awesome.
Some of mine, some of the jazz wolves.
You see, right with your kids, everybody.
Yeah.
So Regina, following up, some favorite jazz musicians. Names.
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I was a roadie for 7 years for Elvin Jones, the great jazz drummer, John Coltrane's drummer throughout the 60s. He's as influential and as revolutionary on the drums as Coltrane was on the saxophone. And the two of them had this, the musical partnership between the two of them is one that I remain like astounded by. So being able to spend a lot of time with Elvin and listen to his band and tour the world with him, and hear also how the same 5 musicians played the same song for 2 weeks straight, and how it evolved and how the relationship solidified and how the solos evolved and who played essentially the same solo every night and whose solo evolved and what happened. That was incredibly informative and fascinating for me. So, and Elvin became like a grandfather to me. So, I mean, Elvin is certainly high on my list of favorite drummers. And, this is a guy who studied polyrhythm and studied how Indian and drum ensembles played and figured out how to like do it all in one body, like figured out how to sound like 4 drummers at once, his sense of, and also a guy who's, his drumming was so powerful that people always reach for these kind of elemental descriptors. People talk about him sounding like thunder and volcanoes and tsunamis and, which is true, but also there was a precision, an elegance, an intellect to his work that those words only kind of tell half the story. He kind of like only played the beat by implication a lot of times. Like he never plays the beat itself. He plays all around the beat. And maybe once in a 12-minute song, he actually plays the beat. And I would like sit there listening for that one moment where he plays the beat and sort of trying to track what happens. And I mean, it was just really, you know, educational for me. And talking to a lot of the guys in his band over the years too, because again, we'd be on the road together, you know, and sitting down with these guys and being like, how do you think about soloing? Like, how do you put into words the thought process behind your conception of solo? You know, stuff like that was like incredibly informative to me. So I'm at the Blue Note on his 70th birthday. I was there. Yeah, Max Roach was in the audience. Elvin had to be taken off the stage by his wife.
Yes. I think Wynton also performed on stage with him that night, Wynton Marsalis.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I was there. That would have been like 2000, 99, 2000, something like that.
I think 99, because my son was born 2000, somewhere in around that time frame there.
Okay.
Amazing night.
Yeah. We used to play the Blue Note. Elvin used to play the Blue Note about 2 nights, two-week stands every year. So we'd be up in the Blue Note, and people, Wynton would sit in. Everybody would sit in. Sometime, you know, there was one week where Ravi Coltrane, John's son, was the tenor saxophone player, and it was eerie because Ravi is like a dead ringer for his father. So it was like I was sitting there watching Elvin and this, you know, 7-year-old Elvin and a guy who looks like Coltrane at 39, and it was just like, this is weird, you know, like
surreal.
Yeah, totally surreal.
Well, that's great. Amazing stories, and I love how it all, you know, ties back to music, and you know what I think in some ways speaks to the importance of being inspired in some ways by outside your genre, and then learning to work within, you know, so your inspiration, you know, can kind of come from all these directions that, you know, maybe, you know, not the exact thing that you're doing. But
yeah, I mean, there's something to that idea of playing around the beat too, you know, that I got to think through more, but the idea of dancing around it, playing variations on the thing versus playing the thing itself is sort of an interesting concept to try to incorporate into writing. You know, that might be like, you know, the exercise that we did on Thursday about writing an argument, right? Mm-hmm. In some ways, when people argue, sometimes they say what they mean. Sometimes they hammer down on the exact thing they're upset about. A lot of times they don't. A lot of times they don't know what they're upset about, and they play around it. They say everything but the thing. And if you're writing that scene, maybe you want to think about Elvin Jones' conception of polyrhythm and how when we argue with each other, it takes us 10, 15 minutes to figure out what it is we're actually upset about. And until we do, we're playing everything but the beat. We're everywhere on the set except the beat itself, you know?
You're talking, you're bringing two people to mind for some reason. One is Thelonious Monk, because he has that way of playing, and I think he was really influential for Coltrane, right? The little period that he played with him,
yes,
you know, gave him this kind of the sense of all the things you don't play. Yeah. And then for some reason I'm thinking of Larry David, who you know, creates these incredible arguments, right? And is at this point like a virtuoso of it, right? Like that, and is basically an improvisational show, right? The Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's like he comes up with the concept. He's a writer who doesn't actually write scenes. He comes up with the Monk's amazing. He comes up with the situation is funny. The situation has to be funny, and then it's just him and his friends screaming at each other, and then they edit it, and that's the show. Curb Your Enthusiasm. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and this points to a lot of things, right? Which is like, you know, all of the planning, all of the rehearsal, all of the treatment writing, ultimately, you know, all of the playing of scales, all of the learning of chords, it ultimately liberates you for the moment when you forget about all of that and improvise, right? All of Larry David's understanding of comic structure, it prepares you to just like come off the dome, you know? Yeah.
And you gotta think how it's internalized David's structure is from working on network TV for however many, decade, or I don't know how long Seinfeld was on the air, but you got to think like he probably dreams in 3-act structures at this point. He doesn't need to sit down and write a script because, like that experience enables you, it's like, I mean, that's when, that's mastery, right? And not everybody obviously ever gets to a place like where he's at. But yeah, think about in some ways, it's interesting to think about as us as writers, is how we can duplicate some aspect of that, how we can wire something of our form into our unconscious to where we are liberated to just go for the bit, go for the what's funny in this moment in an improvisational way.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think you're exactly right. Real mastery of the form. You want to get to the point where you're not looking at the 17 points of a screenplay in Save the Cat.
Yeah.
You just have internalized them. You've watched enough movies, you've written enough that your action just organically falls as it should, right? That your solo organically ends as it ought to allow the chorus to come back in. Yeah, absolutely. What you said also reminds me of a famous, possibly apocryphal story, conversation between Coltrane and Miles when Coltrane was in Miles' band, right? And supposedly Coltrane goes to Miles and he's like, Miles, man, I'm having trouble figuring out like how to end my solos. And Miles says, take the fucking horn out of your mouth.
He's a nice guy. I think he's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great talk. I think we've gone over a little bit. I don't know if anyone has any more questions. If it's not apparent, Adam and I could continue this conversation for the next 3 hours. And as much as I'm tempted to, we have another talk at 3. And all right, one last question mentioned earlier. Okay, help me out here. Look for it or just copy paste it, Danya.
Here we go. Where do you begin when planning a new novel? Do you focus more on your editing or on the outline of the draft itself? Where do you start when planning a new novel? Well, I mean, something is always the engine for any project, right? Like there's always a character that won't leave you alone, or an idea that you feel you need to explore and animate. So, there's that. Got another joke. Yeah, I got another joke. I'll get to the joke. Let's see. But when I begin a new novel, I mean, as you can probably guess from my character workshop, I try to ground everything in character. I try to elaborate on my understanding of those characters and how whatever the central relationships or conflicts in the piece are as filtered through their sensibilities, right? Plot on its own is not usually where I start. It's on understanding the characters, getting to a point where I feel like I know how they're going to react and respond, and then sketching out the plot. I mean, for me, I tend increasingly to kind of think in scenes and in the ways that scenes end. Like where are we? How does each piece resolve? Like how am I sticking the landing of each section, chapter, scene? How does that springboard me into the next? And a lot of that is about balance and about rhythm. Like when I'm outlining a screenplay or anything, I'm not explicitly thinking about rhythm, but a sense of the internal rhythm of the piece begins to take form, and I begin to structure that outline with a sense of the bounce of the piece. Like I'm going to do this, and then and then this is going to follow from this, and I've never really tried to articulate this before, but yeah, like a rhythmic structure and a balance sort of begin to emerge, if that makes any sense. Does that make any sense?
To me, I don't know. Danya, what do you think?
It makes a little sense.
That's fair.
Score.
I mean, to answer the question much more simply, like, I try to write that outline beginning to end, straight up. Like, and I write beginning to end. Like the one consistent thing that I've always done and can't even imagine doing otherwise is I try to write everything 100% in the order in which it will appear. Like if I'm juggling timelines or I'm juggling character point of views, I'm still trying to write them in the order because that sense of rhythm is so important to me. So even if I'm bouncing around in time, I'm putting everything down in the order that I've decided it will appear in, if that makes sense. Because I don't ever want to write something without foreknowledge of everything, or without the knowledge bank of everything in the book that came before it. Because I don't want to miss an opportunity to carry some thread through that I began, to come back to some idea, or to have to go in later and awkwardly lace it in or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that helps. Does that help, Danya?
It does make sense. When I first started the program, that was also when I started like outlining a lot more, which I found is really helpful, because before, like in high school, college, I was trying to write something, I would literally pull it out of my ass, which, as you can imagine, rarely works out. And now I kind of have like a few sentences here and there for like a certain chapter, like, well, we'll go down, so like I don't get lost partway through and be like, wait, where was I going again? So that does make sense. Yes.
One other thing I'll say about the treatment writing, the outline writing, is my approach is to put in whatever is essential into each scene. Like if I have bits of dialogue, if I have a critical exchange, that gets written into the outline. I really try to drop as many breadcrumbs for myself as I possibly can. So if there's a central moment, a central exchange, I might find myself writing the whole thing. The outline might end up at critical moments, at really important junctures, becoming damn near the entire scene. Not with all the bells and whistles, but with the critical dialogue, particularly in a screenplay where dialogue is like one of the only real tools you have. Yeah. All right, another joke. So, as I think was mentioned in the bio, like one of my recent projects was a book called A Field Guide to the Jewish People, which is a humor book that I wrote with Alan Zweibel and Dave Barry. And, we would tour this book basically by spending like months in Florida speaking to every JCC full of old Jews that would have us. And more often than not, like we'd be on stage riffing and talking and reading pieces from the book. But at some point it would just turn into like a round robin of jokes, which was like hilarious and made me feel like I was in the Catskills in the 1920s.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is funny because Alan literally started his career playing those rooms in the Catskills. Alan tells a story about how he was discovered. He and Billy Crystal were neighbors in Long Island and used to drive up to the Catskills together, perform at these like, clubs, try to make 4 drunks from Duluth laugh or whatever. And Alan was a notoriously terrible stand-up. And one day he got off stage after like making nobody laugh. And there's a guy at the bar who turns to him and says, "That was the worst set I've ever seen." And I was like, "Yeah, thanks. That's just what I need to hear right now." And the guy's like, "But the writing is good. Do you write your own jokes?" And he's like, "Yeah." The guy's like, "Well, I got this TV show I'm starting. Maybe you want to audition for it." And it's Lorne Michaels. And that's how Alan gets on Saturday Night Live. So I say that to say
that was the worst set I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's great. So a lot of the jokes that we would tell are, like examples in my mind of Jewish humor, right? And we can all debate and discuss what Jewish humor means, but the level of self-deprecation and this and that, I mean, whatever. We already talked about Larry David. It means a lot of things, I think. One of the things it means is that like some of the, like the joke I'm about to tell, I think is quintessentially a Jewish joke. It does everything that like a Jewish joke should do. My mother hates this joke. She's like, you should never tell this joke again. My mother's just as Jewish as I am, which is to say not very, but also 100%. All right, so the joke is, another key comedy tip is always spend like 15 minutes setting up the joke before you tell it. It really raises the stakes. All right, so the joke is this. This Jewish guy moves in next door to Rockefeller, right? And he buys the same Cadillac that Rockefeller drives. He hires the same gardener to trim the hedges. And one day, Rockefeller comes out of his house and looks over at his neighbor and he's like, hey, you think you're as good as me, don't you? And the Jewish guy's like, as good as you? I think I'm better than you. And Rockefeller is furious and he demands to know how the hell this guy could think that. And the guy's like, well, for one thing, I don't live next door to a Jew.
Oof.
Ooh, to me, that does it. But like, you know, I can agree to disagree.
Yeah, I mean, but look, he does live next to a Rockefeller. I mean, you don't get better than that.
Yeah, I love that joke because it's this sort of redirecting of the anti-Semitism back at the anti-Semite. So it hits Rockefeller, but also it's about like self-loathing, which is central to the Jewish experience and the immigrant experience. Like, it kind of does everything.
Hey there.
Santhi, you want to say hi to Uncle Theo? And these are sorted.
Oh, you're a big one. Hey, cutie. You having a good time? You eating stuff? You napping? You hearing your daddy talk? Daddy saying funny things?
I'm 4.25.
What?
No, get out of here.
You are very good. Are you being played off stage, Adam?
The hook, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us. You're always welcome at the program. So maybe we'll just kind of make it a regular thing, because I think there's so much we can get from you that you have to offer for, I think, what everyone is doing in here. And it's just always an absolute pleasure to catch up. So thanks very much. And guys, we got a little break, and then we'll be back in about a half hour for Lincoln's talk. So I'll see you then. And Adam, I'm gonna holler at you.
Holler at me. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.